Some advanced Apex concepts is what we're going to talk about in today's session. Okay, so these are things which are very important for you to understand in order to write the correct Apex code and in order to understand how Apex is actually executed in the backend. All right, we write program uh, and we understand the methods and we write the methods and we execute them. But there are a few other important small things which are very important to be understood in order to understand how your program actually gets executed so that you can write better Apex. Okay. So first concept that we will talk about is an Apex transaction. Okay, so what is an Apex transaction? An Apex transaction represents a set of operations. So this is basically a collection of operations that are executed as a single unit. So this represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. So they are executed all together. Okay. All DML operations in a transaction either complete successfully. So in a transaction, all the DML operations either complete successfully, or if an error occurs in one operation, the entire transaction is rolled back. Okay, so basically what happens, transaction as we discussed, it's a set of operations. Okay, and there is a transaction boundary. So all the DML operations which are there inside the transaction boundary, either all of them execute successfully or all of them get rolled back. Okay. So it will not happen that if I have 4 DML statements there, 2 will get executed and 2 will get rolled back. So in a transaction, either all the DML statements will get executed or none of them. Okay. So all DML operations in a transaction either complete successfully, or if an error occurs in one operation, even in one of the operations, the entire transaction is rolled back and no data is committed to the database. Fine. Okay. The boundary of a transaction can be a trigger, a class method. So these can be the boundary of the Apex transaction. It can be a trigger. A trigger can be a boundary. So if you have written several DML operations inside the trigger, either all of them will get executed or none of them. A class method. So one method is a boundary of Apex transaction. An anonymous code block. Okay, anonymous code block is something which we will discuss in our possibly in our next session. So this is just a code that you write in the runtime and you execute. Okay, it's not a part of a method or anything. Okay, so that code block is also boundary for an Apex transaction. A Visualforce page. Okay, so if when I say Visualforce page, loading of the Visualforce page is again boundary for the Apex transaction, or rendering of a re-rendering of a Visualforce page is the boundary for Apex transaction. Okay, all operations that occur inside the transaction boundary represent a single unit of operation. So that actually occurs as a single unit of operations. So that's fine. Okay, that is what an Apex transaction is. Okay. Now, why are these transactions useful, or how are these transactions useful? Transactions are useful when several operations are related. Okay, so if you have related operations, one operation is related to the other one. In that case, transactions are useful. And either all or none of the operations should be committed. And you have a requirement where the operations are, related, and you want either all of them should get executed or none of them should get executed. So either all of them get committed or none of them gets committed. All right. This keeps the database in a consistent state. So this keeps you in a very your database in a consistent state. So after you run a method, you know that okay, fine. If there was an error, then nothing has been committed to the database. But if it commits half of the thing, then what will happen? Then we will be in a stage of dilemma that what happened, what got committed, what did not get committed, and there can be a lot of errors. So that will make your data inconsistent. Okay. There are many business scenarios that benefit from transaction processing. So there are a lot of business scenarios that can benefit from this transaction processing. So let's understand a simple example, something which you can easily relate to, and you can understand why transaction is so important. transferring funds from one bank account to other account. Let's say you're transferring fund from one bank account to the other account. Now what should happen? There's a certain amount which should be deducted from the first account, and it should be added to the second account, right? That is what should happen. Now in this case, it involves debiting the first account and crediting the second account. Okay, just an example for you to understand. In this case, what should happen? These two operations need to be committed together to the database. Either both of them should get committed together, or both of them should be rolled back. It should not happen that your first account got debited, second did not get credited because of some error, let's say, because there was some error, and the first got debited and it never got rolled back. Then what happens? Then your data becomes inconsistent, right? So there are operations like this. Okay, if I have to take one more example, we were doing the wizard the other day. Remember we were doing that wizard example? Now, in that wizard example, we used that method for saving the data, and it had three insert DML operations. First one inserting the account, second one inserting the contact, third one inserting the opportunity. Okay. Your business logic is that all three of them need to be inserted together. That is what we were trying to do, right? We could have inserted the first one on the page one, but why we were trying to do it on all three of them? Because the business wants me to create an account, a contact, and opportunity, all three of them together. Okay. Now if you have that sort of an interface, and let's say at the time of execution your account gets created, so first DML operation which happens is account gets created, right? So let's talk about this scenario. So I think what we're trying to do is, first was my insert account, then I was trying to insert the contact, and then I was trying to insert the opportunity. Okay, my business scenario is that all these three need to be created together at once. Okay, and I just have one user interface for entering the value of all these three. Now what happens is, let's say at time of execution, when you clicked on the save button, insert A, this is successful. Insert C, this is also successful. Insert O, has error. What happens? This does not get created. Now ideally what should happen? These two have already got inserted, right? So if it keeps the account and contact, then your data becomes inconsistent. The next time you do not know whether account got created or contact got created or what got created. So the moment it finds error here, it will roll back the first two statements also. So no account will be created, no contact will be created. You again, because you will again use the same interface, and you will again have to enter all the information of account, contact, everything. Got it? So that is the thing. That is what an Apex transaction is. All right. So this is how we benefit from an Apex transaction. Okay. So I think this example was more relevant to you. Again, this bank account example is something which logically actually tells us that, okay, why this is so important to execute the code in transaction. Why transaction processing is so important. All right. So that's one part. All right. So Apex transaction is something which we understand by now. So we know that all the DML operations within a method or a trigger either will get executed altogether or will get rolled back. Okay. Now the next thing that I want you to understand is Apex and order of execution. Okay. So I want you to understand the order of execution of the Apex code. So when we have written an Apex code, and when we are trying to do, let's say, an insert operation or an update operation, what is the order of execution? What happens before data is committed to the database? What all things happen? Okay, so that's the second thing that I want you to understand. Order of execution. Okay. When you save a record, or when you try to commit some data to the database with an insert or update statement, Salesforce performs the following events in this order. So these are the events which are performed. Okay, so what all happens and in what order they happen. Okay, let's understand this. On the server, Salesforce loads the new record field values from the request and overwrites the old values. Okay, so it takes the new field values, whatever you have supplied, okay, and overwrites the old values. Okay, now, so that's, definitely it will take the values that we have supplied. Then the second thing it does is it checks whether whatever insert or update statement we are using, okay, if that is something, or the data commitment is happening from a standard UI edit page. Okay, if it is coming from a standard UI edit page or something, then what happens? Salesforce runs system validation to check the record for compliance with layout specific rules. So this is more to do with the page layout and stuff. If you remember, on page layout also we have an option of making fields required and all. So if there are any data validations to be checked in compliance with the layout specific rules, first of all it will go and check those. But this is something which is applicable for standard UI edit page. Okay, all right. It's not applicable if the data is getting inserted from the backend using a data loader or through an Apex code or something like that. Okay, it's something which happens if we are talking about a page. Okay, if it is using a UI. So layout specific rules will be applicable only if we are entering the data from the layout. So that's pretty simple. And it checks required values at the layout level and field definition level and all that stuff. Okay, so things like, is a value allowed or is it required, or what is permitted and not permitted, all at layout level. Okay, valid field formats are there, maximum field length is there, and all that stuff. Okay, so that's about when you use a layout. Okay, Salesforce doesn't perform system validation in this step when the request comes from other sources such as an Apex application or a SOAP API call. Okay, so this will not be checked if it comes from some other Apex code or some anywhere else, or maybe a data loader. Okay, so all these things will not be checked. So this part is only important when it's happening through the layout. Okay, now what happens next? So the layout specific rules are checked. What is the next thing that is checked? It executes all before triggers. So we know the triggers, right? So all the before triggers are executed then. Okay, then it runs system validations and runs any user defined validation rules. So after before triggers, any system validation will be executed. System validation is something like if the field value is not, the data format is not correct, that's a system validation. System validation means validations which are defined by the system itself. Okay, something like if you are trying to enter a number in a string in a number field, that's a system validation. If you are leaving a required field blank, that's a system validation. So we have not defined those validations, those are all system validations. Okay, so it runs system validation. So first of all it will execute before triggers, then it will run system validations and runs any user defined validations. So system validation, then user defined validation. User defined validation rules are the ones that we define. Okay, then it executes duplicate rules. Then we'll go and check if there are any duplicate rules and if the data is duplicate or not. Okay, so duplicate rules basically is not your before trigger duplicate rule that you are trying to define, that comes under before trigger. Duplicate rules are when you create a field, when you're creating a field, you define, make this field as unique, right? So those are basically considered under the duplicate rules. Okay, and the ones that you have defined under triggers will be taken care of in the before triggers. All right. Okay, so when it checks the duplicate rules, after executing the duplicate rules, finally it will save the record to the database but doesn't commit yet. The record is saved in the database, but it is not committed into the database. Okay. Then it will execute all after triggers. We will go and check all the after triggers. Execute assignment rules, any assignment rules, assigning a record to someone specific and all that is executed. It executes workflow rules. Okay, if there are workflow field updates, if there are any field updates, updates the record again. Okay, so it again will update the record if there are field updates in the workflow field update. So workflow rules get executed. If the record was updated with the workflow field update, now because again the record is being updated, so in that case it fires before update triggers and after update triggers one more time. Okay, because again that thing is happening. So this before update trigger, not before insert but before update trigger, will be fired once again, and after update trigger will also be fired once again. All right, because update is happening, which is again logical. Then it executes any escalation rules. So if the rule, there are any escalation rules which need to be executed, those will get executed. If the record contains a roll-up summary field or is part of a cross-object workflow, performs calculations, and so if that object in which the data is getting inserted,
Jit,
that has
I lost my connection, Jit.
okay. So what was
Last
the last thing that
2 minutes I
heard?
didn't. The previous last 2 minutes I didn't hear anything.
No, what was the last point that you heard?
Yeah, till workflow rules I can.
Okay.
I was there.
Okay. So then it executes workflow rules. Okay. Now in workflow, we have an option of putting field updates, right? So if there are any field updates, okay, it updates the record, and because update is happening, then your before update trigger and after update trigger will be executed once again. Got it? Which is pretty logical, right? So after that, it goes and executes the escalation rules. Okay. Then if the record contains any roll-up summary field, so if it has any roll-up summary field, those fields will get updated. Or if this record, parent of this record, which is getting inserted, let's say you're trying to insert opportunity and you have a roll-up summary on the parent field, parent object account. So if there's a roll-up summary on the parent record, then the parent record will get updated and the entire save operation procedure will happen for the parent record. Okay, and the parent record goes through the save procedure. Okay, so this entire save procedure will happen for the parent record. If the parent record is updated and a grandparent record is there, then the same thing will be repeated for the grandparent. So the same stuff. Finally, after all these things, the data is committed to the database. Okay, so this is where the data is committed to the database when everything is done. So these are all steps which actually take place before the data is committed to the database. All right. So when we are talking about a rollback scenario happens before this stage, before the data is committed to the database. Okay. So all these things will happen for all the records, and finally it will check. If it finds everything is okay, then only the data gets committed. Okay. Any rollback has to happen, will happen before this stage. Got it? So data gets committed to the database, the DML operations commits to the database, that happens, and after that executes post commit logic. So there are some logics which execute after commitment of the data, like sending an email. Okay, so sending an email is something which cannot happen before data commitment, because once you have sent the email, you cannot roll it back, right? So there are things which cannot be rolled back, so like an email. So in that case, those logics get executed after the data is committed to the database. Got it? Long process, but very important. Okay, let me try to make this long process a little shorter for you. Okay, so order of execution for you is so first should be if it is through layout, then layout specific validation. If not, no validation, so this step is not there. Then before triggers, then system validation, then user defined validation, so our validation rules, or just call it validation rules. User defined, um, after triggers, sorry, data is saved, data saved but not committed. Then comes our after trigger, then comes our data saved but not committed, then comes the after trigger, then comes all the OOTP functionalities. Okay, just for you to remember it in one word, out of the box functionalities, which include everything like escalation rules, assignment rules, workflow rules, all these things. Okay, it's not that important to remember the order for these things, so I just put it all under one thing. Okay, finally after your OOTP you have data committed to database. So if I have to make that long story short, this is how it is going to be. Okay, so I think that needs to be done before triggers will happen, and the system validation, custom validation, data saved after triggers, OOTP rules, and then data gets committed to the database. So this is how it works, right? So these are broad categories. I just try to put it all of them under broad categories. Okay, and this long list is always there. Here, okay. Now what happens here is, if there is a DML statement which is getting executed, we have understood about transaction. Okay, so transaction is one thing. Now let's talk about a DML statement in general. Transaction we understand. Now the next thing that I'm going to talk about is a general DML statement. Okay. Now what happens with the DML statement is, if you are trying to, let's say, insert list of accounts, okay, and this list has 100 accounts, let's say. Okay, so this DML statement actually also works as a complete operation. So either this DML statement will completely get committed to the database or will be rolled back. Okay, so this concept is different from transaction. Transaction, I was talking about multiple DML statements. Can you just give me 1 second, please? Yeah, sorry. Okay, so an Apex transaction is different. What I'm trying to tell you now is about a DML statement. So if a DML statement is written to insert 100 accounts or update 100 accounts, that DML statement also either executes completely or gets completely rolled back. Okay, so it will not happen that it creates 30 records and it finds an error on 31st record. It will still get rolled back and it will not insert these 30 records as well. It will not perform a half DML statement. Correct? So that's the logic that works for a DML statement also. All these standard DML statements, insert, update, delete, all the DML statements work on this logic, and which is again fair enough, a good thing which happens.
But it is similar to a transaction, right?
No, see, the boundaries are different, right? So DML statement, when I'm talking about, I'm just talking about one single statement. All right. So I want you to understand that logic. And a transaction is, when I'm talking about a transaction is that can be multiple DML statements, one insert, one delete, and all that stuff, right? Got it? So a transaction also either
Yeah, got it.
completely gets committed or gets rolled back, and a DML statement also completely gets committed or gets rolled back. Okay, so that is what I want you to understand. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. Now, in case of a DML statement, you might want this thing to work the other way around. You might want, like, let's say, if some record has an error, you just might want to skip that one and then at least commit the other records. Correct? Sometimes it may happen that you just want that, okay, if one record has an error, there is no point rolling back the entire DML statement. Rather, let me skip the ones which have error and at least commit the ones which are okay. Okay, so for that we have another option here, which is, for that we have a class called DML database class. Okay, for that we have something called a database class. So database class is a class which is there, and it's defined by Salesforce, and we can use the methods of that class, database class. Okay, so let's understand about this. Apex offers two ways to perform DML operations using DML statements or database class methods. Okay, so whatever DML operation you want to perform, you have two ways of doing that. You use the DML statement, the normal ones, insert, update, and all that stuff, or use the database class methods. So database class methods are also used for doing the DML operations. Okay, why would we do that? Why would we use database class and where will we use DML statement? Let's understand that. So I told you about DML statement. The restriction with the DML statement is either it will completely get committed or it will get rolled back. So that's the problem with the DML statement. The difference between the two options is that by using the database class method, you can specify whether or not to allow for partial record processing. Okay, so the problem with the DML statement is it does not allow partial records processing. It either commits the entire set of records to the database or rolls back the entire set of records, which we don't want. In that case, we should use database class method. So you can specify whether or not to allow for partial record processing if errors are encountered. So if there is an error encountered, you have an option using database class method. You have an option to allow partial record processing. Make sense, right? So you can do so by passing an additional second Boolean parameter. So there's a Boolean parameter for database class method, which say in where you have that option of defining it as true or false. Okay, so when I say database class method, that is defined as like this: database dot insert. So the database is the class, and method there are default methods there, like there is an insert. So insert method basically requires you to give two parameters. First parameter is the list of account or whatever records. Let's say list of account. Okay, this is I want to insert this account. So I have two options. Using DML statement, what I can do, I can simply write insert accounts. In this case, what will happen? Either this entire set of records will get processed or entire set of records will get rolled back. Okay. The other option I have is okay. So this requires two attributes: list of a subject and the boolean true or false. Okay. So what does this true and false means? What do we define there? If you specify the boolean's value as false for this parameter, okay, and if a record fails, the remainder of DML operation can still succeed. So if you make it false, then even if one record has an error, encounters an error, the rest of the uh, processing can still succeed. There will not be a problem. Okay. But if you set it to true, then what will happen? Then it will act as a normal DML statement. Then it will just roll back the records. By default, this optional parameter is true, which means that if at least one S object can't be processed, all remaining S object won't, and an exception will be thrown for the record that causes a failure. Okay, so even if one cannot be processed, the others will also not be processed. Okay, so this should be false. Okay, but if you just write it like this, database dot insert, sorry. Okay, if you don't, by default the value of that boolean is true. So if you just write this, then this is similar to insert, so there is no difference then. Okay, then it's similar to what you have here. Okay, and this database class has a lot of other methods. So like the normal DML operations are okay. There are a few more methods which allow you to do a few more custom kind of operations on the database. So if you just go to your this account, okay, so you can just say database class Salesforce and it will give you a list of, so this is a database class in Salesforce and it will give you a list of all the methods that are there inside it. Okay, see, there's so many of them. Okay, so insert is what we just talked about, database dot insert. Okay, so this is for single S object and this is for list of S objects. So see the parameters which are being passed, right? You have a merge option and all these things. So we don't have these many options available with our normal DML. We just have insert, update, delete, undelete, right? But here we have so many of them, right? So these are all custom defined things. So eventually you will learn how to use all of them, but it's a good thing, right? Like you see, there's an option for merging records. Okay, so you have an option of merging a subject with the IDs. So if you specify some else subject and then you specify the ID, that can be merged into that ID. All right. Okay. So that's about the DML versus database class methods. Clear on this? Please let me know if you have any question here.
Clear, Jit.
Clear now? Okay, great. So these are all, very small concepts, but these are very important, and especially from the point of view of the interview, right? So these can be, very small tricky questions that can be asked during interview. That, hey, what if I don't want the entire set of records to be rolled back while performing a DML operation? So there's something very simple, and there's nothing that actually uh, that's actually very huge and all, right? These are very simple concepts, and if you understand this, you write better code wherever you need the entire statement to be, executed at once. You use that one. Use your normal DML operation, and wherever you want partial processing to happen, then use a database class. Okay. Okay. So since we have talked about these things, now the next thing that we are going to talk about is governor limits. Okay, execution governor limits. So I hope you have some idea or some understanding of what a governor limit is. So let's still talk about it. A governor limit is a very simple concept. What exactly a governor limit talks about is limitations on your Apex code. Okay, for everything within Salesforce, because it's a multi-tenant environment, right? There are a lot of people using the same server, so it's not your personal server that you keep on doing whatever you want. So Salesforce wants to make sure that people who are using it, they also are, confined to certain limitations, and that limitation is, you know, um, applicable on everything that we have in Salesforce, starting from simple things as how many objects you can create, how much data you can store. There's a limitation to everything, right? How many emails you can send. So whatever we do for everything there is a limitation. Okay. And for all the standard functionalities, all the functionalities which have been provided by Salesforce, or all the declarative things, they control the limitation because they have written the code. For all those declarative methods also, the code has been written by Salesforce. So they control the limitations for everything. Right? However, Apex is one thing where we are writing the code, which means we are controlling the program. So Salesforce, to make sure that someone is not writing the wrong program and unnecessarily using too much of space or jamming the entire server, because when you are writing the program, you can write anything that can have an error, that can be an endless loop that does not stop at all, and that sort of thing, right? So you can do anything. So for that reason, they just want to make sure that there are some execution governor limits which are defined. Okay. Anytime you try to, your code exceeds those limits, it throws you an uh, error. Okay. So instead of, the code getting executed for indefinite time, it throws you an error, and there are certain limitations that we have to work with while we are. So we have to make sure that the Apex that we are writing um, follows all those limitations, and it works well, keeping in mind the limitations. Okay. So let's understand what this governor limit is. Because Apex runs in a multi-tenant environment, which we know, the Apex runtime engine strictly enforces a number of limits to ensure that runaway Apex doesn't monopolize shared resources. So they just want to make sure that any runaway Apex does not monopolize the shared resources. Okay, so that's the reason why there are some governor limits which are imposed by Salesforce.com. If some Apex code ever exceeds a limit, the associated governor issues a runtime exception. Okay, so if your Apex code exceeds a limit, then your associated governor issues a runtime exception. Okay, so very simple concept. Now let's understand a few common governor limits, the ones which you will use very frequently. There are a lot of them, but you don't need to know each and every one of them. I want you to understand the concept nicely. So some common governor limits which we use very frequently and which we will need to deal with very frequently. Total number of SOQL queries issued in a transaction. Okay, now we know what is a transaction, right? So total number of SOQL queries issued per transaction is 100. So within one transaction, now we understand what's a transaction and we know what's a transaction boundary. So in a certain transaction boundary, which can be an Apex class method, which can be a trigger, total number of SOQL queries that can be issued is 100. You cannot have more than 100 SQL queries inside one transaction. Okay. The moment, so usually we don't write 100 SQL queries one by one in any method, but if you have written an SQL query inside a loop, okay, let's say I've written a SQL query inside a loop and that loop runs more than 100 times, then the number of SQL query also becomes 100. So, okay, so it will just get executed 100 times and the 101st time it will throw you an error that, okay, there's this exception error, correct? So you need to make sure that while you're writing the code, you need to make sure that you are not executing your SQL query more than 100 times in a code, okay, in a transaction. Total number of records retrieved by a SQL query is 50,000. So one SQL query, maximum number of records which can be retrieved by that SQL query, one SQL query is 50,000, not more than that. Okay, it cannot retrieve more than 50,000 records in one SQL query. Total number of records retrieved by database.getQueryLocator. So database.getQueryLocator again is, we just talked about this database class, right? So getQueryLocator is a method which can run the dynamic queries. Okay. So in getQueryLocator, you have one parameter which can be a string, okay, where you actually define the query. Okay. So in that way, what you can do is you can run dynamic query. So if you are fetching uh, if you are retrieving data from this database.getQueryLocator, then it can only return 10,000 records, not even 50,000. A normal SQL query will return 50,000. A database getQueryLocator will only return 10,000 records. It can only retrieve 10,000 records. It cannot work with more than 10,000 records. Okay. Total number of SOSL queries issued in a transaction is 20. SOQL query is 100. SOSL queries which can be issued in a transaction is only 20 because of the obvious reason. We know SOSL queries actually get executed on the entire database, multiple tables and stuff like that, right? So it limitation for that is lesser. So you can just execute 20 SOSL queries. Total number of records retrieved by a single SOSL query is only 2000. So one SOSL query can retrieve only 2000 records, not more than that. Okay. Total number of DML statements issued is not 50, it's actually 150, sorry. Okay. So total number of DML statements which can be issued inside a transaction is 150 maximum. Correct? So not more than 150 DML statements can execute within one transaction. Okay, again, the same logic. No one is actually gonna, ideally you are not gonna write 150 DML statements one by one. Okay, but this may happen if you have put your DML statement inside a loop. Then the chances are there that you hit the DML statement limit very quickly, right? Got it? So these are some common uh, governor limits. There is one more. Total number of records processed as a result of a DML statement is 10,000. Okay, so one DML statement can process maximum up to 10,000 records. Okay, so the maximum number of DML statements in one transaction 150. Maximum number of records processed as a result of one DML statement 10,000. Okay, so like if you are doing an insert on a list, insert of a list of records, that list should not have more than 10,000 records. If you're doing an update operation of a list of list of a subject, that should not have more than 10,000 records. If it has more than 10,000, it will throw an error. If you're writing a SQL query, it should not return more than 50,000 results. If that's the case, it will throw an error. If you're writing an SOSL query, there should not be more than 20 SOSL queries getting executed in one transaction. Otherwise, it will throw error. Correct? So these are certain governor limits, which we will
Jeet,
deal very
if
briefly with.
Jeet,
Mm-hmm.
if single circle query returns more than 2000 record means, then how can we display that? Is there we
SOQL
can
query
split
or
the
SOSL query? So,
SOSL?
huh. Okay. So in that case, what you have to do is you just have to deal with the code in such a way that you do not hit the governor limits. All right. So if it returns more than 2000 records, then it will throw you an error. Okay. So in that case, what do? We'll have we'll talk about some best practices so that we can avoid these things. Okay. But whatever you do, you just have to make sure that you are avoiding this. There is no way you can return more than 2000 records using an SOSL query. Okay, we have to just work around, or make sure that we write the code in a different way so that I'm not returning more than 2000. Correct? Okay. So let's talk about a few best practices. I think this question gets answered when I talk about the best practices of writing Apex. So since we have talked about the governor limits, the next thing that we have to talk about is understanding some of the best practices which can help you avoid these governor limits. Okay, so you just have to make sure that you write your code in such a way that you avoid the governor limits. Okay, so let's understand a few ways of doing the same. First best practice is bulkify your code, which is a very common thing which we should do. So we should bulkify our Apex code. So for an example, this is a poorly written code. Okay, if you write this is a poorly written code. This is not the right code. So it's more or less like, let's say I'm writing a trigger and I write it like this: trigger T1 on account and whatever event, let's say before insert. Okay, and you write account A equals trigger dot new. Okay, so this is a poorly written code. Why? This will work only for one record. We have talked about this earlier also, right? This will only get executed for one record and not for the entire set of trigger.new. So what is, let's do something here, whatever you want. So this is not the right way of writing the code. So always try to bulkify your code. So it should be written the way we have written our triggers. Inside the for loop statement. So this will, now whatever you want to do, okay. So this will write my code for the entire set of records, for the entire trigger.new, right? So this is a code which is written for the bulk records. So always write a trigger for bulk records. Never write a trigger for single record. Okay, that's the wrong approach. Okay, so that's the incorrect approach. Now, so this is wrong trigger. Correct way of writing trigger, use this one, this approach, so whatever. So this is the correct way of writing trigger. That's first thing. Second is always bulkify your DML statement. Okay, what is bulkifying my DML statement? Let's say you want to check some value on some place and then you just want to update some records. Okay, let's say you have a list of accounts. And then you say for, so now we have learned the first thing that okay, it's good to write bulkified code. So you use this one, you say account in ACTS, okay, and then here you say if a dot industry equals technology, a dot description equals let's say this one, okay, and then you want to update that record, update A, okay. Now what is happening here is okay, what is happening here is the DML statement still lies inside my for loop, right? What will happen? The number of times my for loop runs, number of DML statements will get counted. Got it? So the chances are there that you will easily hit the kernel limit. How many DML statements allowed? 150. So in case your ACTS has size of ACTS is less than 150, then this code will work fine. The moment it finds that there are more than 150 records, any case, if you're dealing with a list which is more than 150 records, it will throw you an error because it finds that it will require more than 150 DML statements and it will throw you an error. Okay, so this is wrong code. The wrong code, not wrong, in fact inefficient. Good for only records, set of data which is less than 150, okay, but will not deal with the records which are more than 150, and 150 is very less number, okay, so you can easily hit that governor limit. So what is the efficient way of writing this? So the correct way of writing it, define it like this. So let's have this one. Okay. So what is the efficient way of writing the same code? Bulkify the DML statement. Okay. So instead of doing DML statement for one single record, do it for a list. Define one more list here. Count updated list. Okay. And rest everything should be the same way. For account A, this is this, this is this. Okay. Instead of performing an update operation here, instead of doing an update operation here, what I'm gonna do is I will just add this A to the list. So updated list dot add A. So what happens? No DML statement, only A gets added to this list. Okay. So I form the list and I go ahead, come out of the for loop, and then I say update updated list. Right? So this is what happens. How many DML statement I am consuming? Only one. In this code, what was I doing? Number of records was equal to number of DML statements. Not the right way of writing the code, right? So if you actually want to write efficient code which works for large set of data, use it like this. Keep your DML statement outside the for loop always. And if you want to keep it outside the for loop, then you definitely will have to work with the bulkified DML statement. So try to do a DML statement for bulk records. Then there is again another challenge, that this, again, if you will look into that governor limit that we were talking about, total number of records processed as a result of one single DML statement is 10,000. So that is again one, small challenge that I have. So total number of records that can be part of this is 10,000, but 10,000 is still a very bigger number as compared to 150, right? So this will work absolutely fine for 10,000 records. You will not have a problem, right? So that is the thing. So now you can deal with 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 records till 10,000 with this. All right. Okay. So that's the second best practice. Please let me know if there is any question. Clear? First two things: bulkify your code always, and second is bulkify your
Yes.
DML statement. Okay. So that's the second one. So the poorly written code is this, and correct way of writing is this. Okay. So we have done that. Okay. Third best practice is avoid SQL queries inside your for loops. Okay. So it's not a good habit to write SQL queries inside the for loop. Okay. Why? Because there's again a limitation for SQL queries. Huh? Like DML statement, there is a limitation. There is a limitation for SQL queries also. Number of SQL queries issued in 100 issues in one transaction is 100. If you write an SQL query inside a for loop, then what will happen? Again, it will hit the governor limit very quickly. So let's take an example. avoid SOQL query inside the for loop. Okay, so we take an example, a simple example. Okay, so let's say I have a list of account. Okay, and then I say for account A within ACTS. Now I want to fetch all the contacts of this account. Okay, so I would write a list of contact cons equals select email from contact where account ID equals a.id. Right, so I fetch all the email IDs for this particular account, and then for this list I can again have one loop inside this. Let's say for contact C in cons do something. Okay, come out of this for loop. So now this is inefficient coding. Why it is inefficient coding? Because I put this for loop inside this. So now if this list is more than 100 records, again this will throw an error. So it will work absolutely fine for up to 100 records. Okay, if your number of accounts that you're dealing with here is less than 100, it's okay. If it's more than 100, it throws an error. Alright, so you hit the kernel limit very quickly. So writing an SOQL query inside a for loop is not a very good idea. So what do we do there? What's the other thing that we can do?
We can create another list and then
yes, take the IDs, maybe set of IDs and use that. Okay, so let's say this code, instead of this I make it a trigger. Okay, let's say I'm dealing with a trigger, and on that trigger I actually want to go and check the child contacts and do something on those. Okay, so let's say this is a trigger T1 on account before update or something, whatever. Okay, so in that case it should be trigger dot new. Okay, now I'm using this. Now this trigger will work absolutely fine if you are trying to upload up to 100 accounts. Okay, if you're doing a bulk upload or kind of an operation, and if you have less than 100 accounts, this trigger will execute correctly. If there are more than 100 accounts, this trigger will not work. Okay, so in that case, what is the efficient way of writing this code? So I'll show you use of one of the context variables that we talked about earlier. So it can be the same thing here. Okay, let me type it. So instead of that, you do this: trigger account before update Okay, so here what you do, before you get into the for loop, you write the SQL query. So try writing your SQL query before you get into the loop. All right, how do you do that? Very simple. Say list of count counts equals, let's just select name, type, industry, select email from contact. Okay, so writing a subquery inside that. From account where ID in trigger dot new map. So you could have written a set of IDs from your side also, right? Instead of doing this, I could have used a set of ID from myself. But if it is a trigger, then there is a context variable called trigger dot new map. You remember we talked about that, right? So get the key set from there. Okay, that's it. So it will only get the unique IDs from the trigger.new map, from the trigger.new basically. Okay, trigger.new map is a map. Trigger.new returns list of a subject. Trigger.new map returns a map. Okay, so I'm just getting the set of IDs from there. So where the ID is in this. Okay, so one SQL query retrieves all the results for me. Now I write my trigger this way for account A in ACTS. Okay, so this is for trigger specifically, and I can just go ahead and say for contact CNA dot contacts do something. What do we want to do? Fine. So this is where we are bulkifying our DML, keeping our SQL query outside the loop. Okay, clear on this? If it's not a trigger, then don't use this trigger.new map. Then in that case, you just have to use a set of ID. All that we have to do is we just have to use a set of ID. All right. So that is what can be done. Clear? Okay. So let's go ahead and see other good practices. Okay, the next best practice is use your SQL for loops. Okay, what is an SQL for loop? So in that for statement, use your SQL statement. Use SQL for loops to operate on records in batches of 200. This one answers your question. So when we are talking about if I have really a big set of data, okay, if you write your one big query, then it can return maximum 50,000 records, okay, which becomes a problem. But your SQL for loops operates on records in batches of 200, so it keeps on operating in batches of 200, and it can then go ahead and take care of any set of records, right? So dealing with big set of records, you should write SQL for loops. Okay, so what is SOQL for loop and what is the normal code? I think SOQL for loop is something that we have done in one of our examples also. Inefficient SOQL query. If we are talking about big set of records, if I write something like this, list of account equal to, let's say, select name, type, industry from account, then what happens? This can return can work with 50k records. Okay, another way of doing that is write it this way. For account A, don't write the SOQL query inside the for loop, but use a SOQL for loop, which is select name, type, industry from account. Now, this actually executes batches of 200 records. So it will do what, 200 records. It will check 200 records, perform the operation, come out of the for loop, again go back, again take 200 operations, perform the operation. So it actually gets executed in the batches of 200 records. Okay. So this phase you can actually deal with a lot of records. Correct. Okay, so your list variable now holds 200 items instead of all items in the query results and gets recreated for every batch. Okay, so that's the thing. So it actually performs it in batches. So you will be able to deal with huge set of data. And every batch is performed as one transaction. So basically, your governor limits also get refreshed when you're using that for SOQL for loop. Okay. One more best practice, which is something very common, which we understand very easily, is avoid hard coding IDs. Okay, so never ever hard code IDs in the code. Hard coding IDs means don't use something like let's say a list of contact C equals select email from contact where account ID equals some code. Don't ever do this. Why? Because the IDs they will change from your sandbox to production. So the moment you deploy it from sandbox to production, that will change. Okay. So always prefer not hard coding IDs. Correct. For any record, for anything, any user, whatever. Okay, so IDs should not be hard coded because IDs do change significantly. It's always a good idea to retrieve the ID within the code, define a variable for that, let it use, let it get the ID and then use it. Okay, so that is there. Clear on this, the best practices part? Let me know if there is any question.
Yes,
okay. Now, the other thing that we are going to talk about is testing the Apex code. testing Apex. Okay, what is this testing of Apex? Testing Apex is a simple concept, because we have seen that there are governor limits, and because we have seen that people can actually write, because we understand that people can write incorrect code and all that stuff. So what Salesforce does is they ask you to test all the Apex that you have written. And how do we do a test? We just write test methods. Okay, so basically a test method is a method that will test my actual Apex. Okay, and it will only just go ahead and check whether the code that I have written is correct or not. Uh, it will not commit any data to the database. It will not update, or it will not retrieve any data from the database. Okay, so a test method is only meant for checking whether whatever operations I expect my uh, Apex to do are those doable or not. Okay, so that's what a test method should do. Now, writing Apex test, you just have to keep in mind a few things. Create a new class, though this is not required, but I always recommend creating a new class for your test so that it is all kept in a separate place. Okay, create a new class. It's like creating any other class. I'll show you an example also. Okay, your class should start with at is test annotation. So annotate your class with this before you start writing the code. Okay, why do we need to write this? We need to write this because any class which begins with this is not counted under the limit of number of total Apex, the permitted number of characters which are allowed in our Apex. Okay, so if you look into this, let me log into Salesforce and show you something.
Do we need to write a test class for all the classes?
For
We should.
everything, yes. For all Apex, you need test for all Apex transactions. Not test classes, test methods. Okay, so there's nothing called a test class, there is something called a test method. But I am creating a specific class for writing test method. Why I'm doing that? Because if you see it here, the moment you try to create an Apex class, not sure if you have noticed this. See, you are allowed a limit of 3 million characters for your Apex. Okay, you already used 0.3% of that. Right. So anything which is annotated using at is test is not counted under this limit. Okay, so that is excluded, and all your comments are excluded. Okay, so comments and this as is test annotation classes are excluded. So if you use this, then what will happen? You are keeping enough characters available for you to write the code. Okay, so that is the reason why always create a new class and write it in a class which is annotated with this one. Okay, that's one thing. Okay, then your test method has to be a void method. Static void test method, which means your test method does not return anything. Okay, so define your test method, and it should not return anything. That's there. Okay, apart from this, what else? Every time you run this test method, it provides code coverage to your code. Okay, 75% of code coverage is required for Apex to be deployed. So any Apex that you've written, you want to deploy that Apex, you need 75% of code coverage. You want to deploy it from sandbox to production, you want to create a package. Yesterday we talked about package. Any Apex code that you want to be put into package, that also needs to have 75% code coverage. Okay, so what is the 75% code coverage? How does it understand, or how do we understand if it is 75% or not? So basically it's a simple logic. If you have 10 lines of Apex, each line covered will give you 10% code coverage. Okay, so each line will give you 10% of code coverage. So that's it. Now, having talked
If it
about
has some error, still we can deploy.
error as in,
Like you said, 75% of code coverage is required,
no,
but
see,
the 25.
no, see, 75% of code coverage does not mean error. If you have an error in an Apex code, first place you will not be able to save that code itself, right? Till that time you have an error. Okay. Code coverage means you have got it tested. So 75% of the code should be tested and should return that okay, fine, working absolutely okay. All right. So that's it. So there is that's not error. That is that you have that liberty of testing 75% of code and leaving 25%. But we always recommend try and get the entire code tested. Okay. So basically, what is this test thing? Test is Apex to test actual Apex. So this is basically more Apex. Okay, Apex to check my actual Apex. All right, and this Apex will go and check the actual Apex whether that is working fine or not. All right. Now, what happens here is, what is the difference between your actual Apex code? So now you're seeing that okay, test is Apex for testing the Apex. So what is the difference between actual Apex code and test Apex code? The difference is, if I have to put it in very simple words, in actual Apex code, your actual Apex code has access to database. Okay, data can be retrieved, it can be committed. Okay, so your actual Apex code has access to the database, data can be retrieved, it can be committed to the database. In your test Apex code, it does not have access to database. Okay, which means it cannot retrieve any records from the database. Any SOQL query will not work, or will not retrieve any data from the database. It will not commit. So if you are writing an insert operation, insert A, it will actually not go and write any data inside the database. Okay, so that is what an Apex code does, a test code does. Okay, so don't worry about your dummy records, because for testing I will definitely use dummy records. If I do not have access to the database, then what will I have to do? I deal with dummy records. Let's say for actual Apex code, you have written account A equals select industry from account where name equals IBM, and then I say a dot industry equals technology. Let's say this is my code. Let's say this is my code, okay? And after that I say update. Hey, this is my actual Apex code. This can be executed from a trigger or from a method or wherever, okay? Now I have to test whether this operation will run successfully or not. Okay, so my test class will just go and check whether a particular account industry can be updated and all that, all these things, whatever has to happen here can happen or not. So while you're writing the test, you do not have access to, so you cannot say account a equals select statement. This will not happen, right? So what do you have to do? You just write a dummy account here. Okay, say name equals IBM, industry equals education, something. Okay, a dot industry equals technology, update. Hey, got it? So because my test does not have access to their actual database, you always have to supply the dummy records there. Okay, whatever DML statement you perform after that, oh sorry, before you do this you should say insert a. So this is not going to insert any record in the database, don't worry about that, and this is not going to update any record in the database, so nothing will happen in the database, only it will test. This will only be used for testing. Okay, so that's it. So it will do this and it will check that, oh fine, this is working. So this test method will give the code coverage to this one. That's it. Got it? So just that, instead of running the actual method, we write a test method which can be executed as many times as possible without committing or without creating or without hampering any data in the database, and it can give the code coverage to my actual method. That's it. Got it? So just think of it as a sample dummy method.
Okay.
Okay. So let's do a
Can we
small.
use SQL in test method?
See, your SQL query will not, let you fetch any data from the database. Your test method does not have access to the database.
Yes, yes.
Correct?
Okay.
Okay. So let's do a small example. So let's create a small trigger and write a test method for that. Okay. Write a test method for that trigger. So let's say I'll just go ahead with this. The example that I was just doing now. Let's say I wanted to write a trigger on accounts. T1 okay. Okay. Okay, you just want to say if a dot industry equals technology, let's say a dot description equals technology account. Let's say this is what my trigger will do. Okay, small trigger. This is what my trigger is supposed to do. I need to test this. All that I have to do is create a new Apex class. So I basically want to test. What do I want to test? I just want to go ahead and test whether while a new record is being inserted, if the industry is technology, whether the description gets updated to technology or technology account or not. That is what my actual method is expected to do, and I just want to test it with a dummy set of records. So just go ahead and write public class, test class, whatever. I mean, there's nothing that you have to write. Call it test class. You can call it whatever you want. And then you write. So we'll have to supply the values. Okay. And it's always a good habit to write a test method with multiple records. So instead of using one single record, use multiple records for the test class. Okay. Okay. And I say so now I want to create multiple dummy records. Okay. For new list of account. Integer I equals 1. $200 I plus plus. Okay, so this for loop will run 200 times for integer 1 to 200. Okay, and then I say account A equals new account name equals test account plus I. Industry equals technology. Okay. Acts dot add A. So now this acts is a list of all the dummy accounts that I've just created. Okay. Now all that I have to do is I have to start the test dot start test. Okay, you can avoid this thing, you can skip this part. Okay, there's this method called test dot start test. You can use this or you can just skip it. Okay, what is the advantage of using it? Advantage of using this is that the governor limits get refreshed once you have started test. Okay, so any SQL queries or anything which I've run here will not be counted inside this. Okay, and you will have a fresh limit of governor limits. Okay, so it's good habit to start it. So now I am doing an insert. So if in case you have done any DML statement or anything before this, that does not get counted. So I insert this and then you do test dot stop test. So this is completely optional, but it's good to do that, okay, to get a revised governor limit. Okay, so that's it. This performs this DML statement. Now I just want to go ahead and check whether the value gets updated properly or not. So what I can do is, after this, I can write list of accounts, inserted accounts. Okay, now I say select name and industry from account where ID in accounts. So my SQL query works with this variable, and this actually was defined by me, right? So these are all the records which we have created. So we don't have access to the data which is there in the database. We are just still dealing with the data that we just created. Okay. Now you can write for account A within inserted accounts. I can just do a system.assert and check whether the value of the description got updated correctly or not. So I say system.assert equals, so the system.assert equals is a method which is used for checking some value of a field, right? So which field I want to check? A dot description. Description should have got updated to technology account. So it should be technology account. Okay, so this field should be equal to this value.
System.assert.
Assert. Okay. Right. So this is the code which we have written for testing that. All right, so this is a test method ready. Now how do you run this test method? The moment you run this test method, whatever operations this test method tests, those will get code coverage automatically. Okay. To execute the test method, it's pretty simple. If you go to Apex classes, you have an option of run all test. So this will run all the test methods. You can do that, or the other way is from the developer console. So you can just go to the developer console, and on the developer console you have an option of test. Just click on test and say new run. This is my class. Which test class you want to run now? So you have an option of selecting one of those test classes that you want to run. Okay, so just select this one and say run. The moment it runs, it will provide the code coverage to the trigger. See, overall code coverage for account trigger T1 which we just created is 100%. Earlier it was 0%. Got it? Now my trigger is ready. Got it? If you are not getting 100%, you just double click on this and it will show you this way. So the lines, like it had just 3 lines of code. Okay, so all 3 lines are covered. If you're not getting 100%, then what will happen? It will show you those lines which are not covered in red. So you can try to write a test for that. Okay, please let me know if there is any question or doubt on this simple way. So only simple logic that you have to understand is you have to test the same operation which is happening in the actual Apex without using the actual database records. With your dummy sample of records, you have to test the entire thing, whatever you have written. That's it. If you just remember this much, then you should be able to do anything. Got it? Okay. So if we do not have questions on this, then I think we are good for today. We have covered quite a few